Winnie Mandela, also known as Winnie Mandela, was a South African anti-apartheid activist and politician and ex-wife of Nelson Mandela. Anti-apartheid campaigner and ex-wife of country's first president Nelson Mandela died on 2nd April 2018 at the age of 81. Many called her the mother of the nation. Winnie Mandela was one of the most prominent leaders of the decades-long fight against white minority rule in South Africa.
Pretoria has failed to rule our country.
When her husband, the late Nelson Mandela, was in prison for 27 years, she became the face of the movement to bring equality and justice.
Nobody knows him better than I do. And it is extremely painful to see him going through and see him struggling.
But years later, that image suffered when Winnie was convicted of involvement in the beating death of a suspected police informant. The case was brought before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after the end of apartheid.
Life I've led from that moment has always been in and out of prisons. I can no longer even remember how many times I've been arrested and how many times I've been actually jailed. There have been too many.
Throughout her life, Winnie inspired and fought for millions of poor South Africans. But how will she be remembered? To discuss this, I'm joined by the South African High Commissioner to Tanzania, His Excellency Mr. Tami Mseleku. Mr. High Commissioner, welcome to this program, The International Sphere.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. As now we are celebrating the life of the late Winnie Mandela, and in your culture, they say that the gigantic has fallen, the gigantic tree has fallen. So, what is your take on describing on the loss of the iconic South African leader in South Africa right now?
The country as a country has really lost a very powerful person, both as a leader, a mother of the nation, a woman of resilience, and a symbol of our struggle, the ups and downs of that struggle. But a person who was very principled, who couldn't be swayed by whatever experiences, but focused on the achievement of our liberation. So we have really lost a good mother and a good leader.
Yes, you have said mother of the nation, a good leader, a freedom fighter, all those names, good names that you're giving. What is that really stands out when somebody hears the name Winnie Mandela?
A person of the people. Because whenever you heard that name, it would be in the context of struggling with the people, with the poor, the marginalized. You would hear about that name in the squatter camps of South Africa, in the informal settlements where people had been facing challenges, deaths, police brutality. Anywhere where that was happening, you would hear the name of Winnie Mandela, especially during the struggle years. She would be found among the poorest of the poor, among the downtrodden, and she would be there to defend them, to stand for their rights, and to support them.
We are here today to tell you that that day is not far when we shall lead you
to freedom. Amandla!
Now, as we are mourning that she is gone, and there's so many things that comes into our mind that she has done throughout the time of as a freedom fighter. And how do you want her to be remembered, in your words, or what legacy do you think Winnie Mandela is leaving behind? Well, the people of South Africa altogether and the world at large.
Well, for us, Mama Winnie represents a generation of leaders that is actually passing on now. And what we would hope we would have is a legacy of that type of leadership being actually emulated by the younger generation, especially in the context of the young people now. We do need a quality leadership in Africa, especially the emerging young people. If they could actually follow the likes of Mama Winnie, the likes of Nelson Mandela, of Mwalimu Nyerere, of Jomo Kenyatta, and that generation of leaders, we do need that legacy to be actually emulated, followed, remembered, revered, and understood.
Apart from as a freedom fighter, yes, you call a freedom fighter, but she was a politician too. And now, as we are mourning again, is that she's gone. But do you think that during her time, a lifetime, she really thought that her job was really done and people perceived it positively?
Look, not with Mama Winnie. She would actually, at all times, point out that we have not really achieved the freedom, the total liberation that we actually envisaged. We still faced a lot of challenges. The poor were still becoming poorer. The inequalities in our country were growing. And so she was actually still championing the struggle of the downtrodden, the poor. And so she wouldn't herself say, look, I think I have arrived, but she would continue to say the struggle continues. It may take different form. It may actually be a struggle against a different enemy, but the struggle continues. So she wouldn't actually have accepted that, yes, I've achieved and I've reached the objectives that got me into the struggle in the first place.
Winnie, as a feminist icon, how has she impacted women in South Africa, especially in social change, and also bringing about change as a whole to a nation like South Africa that has struggled a lot through its time of independence, attaining its independence? How has she impacted women, especially as an inspirational to them?
My two former presidents, former President Thabo Mbeki and former President Jacob Zuma, have been talking precisely about that aspect. Winnie representing a generation of women, a collective of women who actually stood up to be counted and said, look, we are not going to sit on the side and watch while our country is being torn apart and our children and our husbands. They took their rightful places and in their own right actually became leaders, became activists, and that has inspired a whole generation of young people. First, within, you will know that she was actually once the president of the Women's League, and during her presidency, she was actually leading in a very assertive way the women's struggle, even within the African National Congress. I recall at the first conference of the ANC in South Africa, in Durban, the conference had to actually pause for a while because the women, led by Winnie, were demanding that a clause in the Constitution be put to actually demand a 50% representation of women in every position in the organization. That was the kind of leadership you had, which was inspiring not just the political struggle for political national liberation, but for gender emancipation in very big ways. So the women were very inspired, and many of the leaders, the women leaders in our country, will always refer to her as an inspiration for their own journey in the liberation of our country, but also in their role in gender emancipation.
I see here that she was also a woman that marred with certain controversies. She was also convicted in kidnapping, fraud, and theft. To what extent do you think this overshadowed her image and maybe to pull her down?
Oh no. If you look at the one thing about Winnie and about that aspect, you will see many of our leaders actually talking about it. President Mbeki referred to it as a commitment to a point of recklessness. That's how he referred to that. You know, from a personal experience, I could actually empathize with somebody in that position. When you are actually in the thick of things and you see your children dying in your hands, when you see how people are treated, and as a result of the brutality of the state, then you are bound at some point to respond in ways that may actually be negative and wrong. And like any human being, she actually responded that way in some occasions. And the organization from time to time would try and pull her back. But she was more passionate, there's also the social worker in her that was very passionate about the challenges that the people were facing, particularly the brutality. And I can actually personally relate to that experience. So I know those were situations which cannot be justified, and nobody is trying to justify them, but is explaining them in terms of her humanity and commitment. She was no saint. We're not actually saying that this was a saint, but this is one leader who, in her folly, was faulting as a result of the commitment to a very just cause.
Yeah, I think with the new generation now, the history is taking a different turn. She's referred as the mother of the nation, and some of them think that she was behind Nelson Mandela. So is that really correct?
Look, there are two phases of that concept of the mother of the nation. The one is a conception that because Nelson Mandela was actually seen as the father of the nation, therefore Winnie as the wife was the mother of the nation. But that is not actually the prominent idea. In fact, the mother of the nation came from a commitment to the nation, to the poor, to the downtrodden. When she was seen to be with the people wherever they were, whether it was students being shot at by the police, whether it was mothers who were mourning their children, whether it was houses that actually been attacked and with people being butchered, they would know that they have a mother to go to. As a result, everybody saw her as their mother. And that's why she actually became the mother of the nation in her own right, not because of being a wife to Nelson Mandela. She was the mother. She is the mother of the nation. From her own actions, her own behavior, her own attitude, she mothered a lot of people. She mothered villages, she mothered homes, she mothered children. She would be there with them all the time, like a mother.
Yeah. President Cyril Ramaphosa said that she's the voice of the voiceless. And also Thabo Mbeki's foundation also was saying that Winnie Mandela never elevated herself above the people. What rings in your head with these statements?
Certainly. As I've been saying, if you actually knew a Winnie, you would know that she would go to one of the humblest areas in which people lived, would go in there, sleep with them. When you come in as the leadership to visit a family that had actually been had a death because of the brutality of the police, you would be surprised to find that Winnie is sitting with the women at the corner there, because in our tradition the women would be sitting at the corner mourning and in their blankets and so on. You would find her with the people, not as a guest or as a person who comes in to actually say we're mourning with you. She would be sitting with them mourning, and that's the kind of person she was. And at the same time, to authority, she would be there to intervene in situations where the apartheid regime was very brutal. She would actually face them directly and say, you are not going to kill our children. What are you doing here? She was the voice of people who couldn't speak for themselves against this brutality of the police. So she was indeed the voice of the voiceless.
We see so many things that Winnie had achieved throughout her lifetime during the liberation struggle. But I also have a quote here that she stated prior to, one of the memorable quotes of Winnie Mandela, that she said, "I'm a product of the masses of my country. I'm the product of my enemy." What must have been to her at that particular moment in time, during the time of movement, within the culture, and being a female leader? How was it taken, or how was it perceived so far?
Let me take the aspect of I'm a product of my enemy. That, you remember earlier on I said some of the reactions that now are quoted in a negative sense stem from exactly how the enemy treated her. She was, first of all, just by ensuring that her husband is actually taken away from her at a very early age, and she has to struggle with these children. And then she's harassed every day, detained. The children have to be harassed all the time. Eventually banished to some place where she's actually kept at Brantford in one house in isolation alone for nine years. Of course, it taught her the hardships that were faced by the people, and it actually produced in her that defiant attitude, because she began to defy even those banning orders. She would not care what banning order she had, she would still be seen in public in defiance of all those things. So when she says I'm a product, whatever I do has been a reaction to a situation. That situation shaped me to be what I am. That's actually very true. It's reflective of the fact that the social conditions shaped me into the person I am. And being a product of the masses also relates to the fact that she had to actually respond to those masses who were defiant and fighting for their own liberation. So she had to be part of those masses, and they produced the leader that she is. And she actually led those masses. That's why there's a kind of interaction between her leadership and her presence among those masses. That's what she actually meant.
Okay. At a point, the late Winnie Mandela was critic to the ruling party, that is the ANC, due to malconducts concerning the issues like poverty, corruption, but she remained loyal to the party.
Yes. Like any disciplined member of the African National Congress, the ANC is endowed with people who have, throughout its history, have had to be able to be self-critical. So one of the values of that ANC is we are not afraid to criticize ourselves. We are not afraid to actually look into ourselves and say, here we were wrong, and here we were right, here we are doing. So there's very long internal debates in the ANC about what, and there will be people who will be critical and even over-critical of the ANC, but remain loyal, and it's because of that loyalty that they are critical to it. It's because of their commitment to the ANC that they say this is actually wrong. If you take, for example, in the last 9-10 years, you would see former President Thabo Mbeki being one of the major critics of the government of President Zuma, because of the loyalty to the values of the ANC and what it stands for. They wouldn't say, you are actually moving away from where we were, so we're no longer ANC, we're something else. They would actually say, this is our ANC. You are taking it in a different direction. Whether they're right or wrong is another issue, but that is what the ANC represents. So she had always been actually such a voice, even during the struggle itself. She would actually be seen as actually being sometimes critical of the leadership and the direction that the leadership was taking in relation to responding to the realities on the ground.
Yes, Mr. High Commissioner, as we are winding up, now we are mourning the death of the mother of the nation, Winnie Mandela. What is the High Commission here in Tanzania doing at this period of time?
Well, as you know, because we're a government institution, we take our directive from the government, and the government has actually given a directive, first and foremost, for all our embassies all over the world to fly their flags at half-mast. So you'll see that we are flying the flag at half-mast in honor of Mamu Winnie. We have also opened a book of condolences, so various people who want to express their condolences are free to come and actually write in our book of condolences, which will then be transferred to the family and to the government. So we are actually following that program. But throughout the year, as you know, our government has dedicated this year to the centenary of Nelson Mandela and Mam Albertina Sisulu, who was Walter Sisulu's wife. Yeah. Now that you have this situation where we've lost the mother of the nation, in all our activities that relate to that, be it our National Day, be it our other programs that are going to be unfolding as the year goes, we will actually be focusing on also the life of Mam Winnie, because it's intertwined with Nelson Mandela, Albertina Sisulu, Walter Sisulu, and all those all those heroes,
yes,
and heroines of our country. Mm-hmm. So that's what we are doing.
Mr. Ambassador, just 3 words, your definition of Winnie Mandela. For those who are watching, just 3 words.
Leader, mother, human being.
Mr. High Commissioner, thank you so much for your time. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Asante, asante. South Africa is to honor Winnie Mandela with a full state funeral on 14th April 2018.
There's a woman fighting for freedom down in Africa. In prison is her distinguished husband, Nelson Mandela. Her natural beauty like the rising sun. In a matter of time, both will be gone. So rise up, sister, rise to your call. Any day now, apartheid's got to fall. Winnie, Winnie Mandela. Winnie, Winnie Mandela. Winnie, Winnie Mandela. Winnie.